The year was 1292 BCE, approximately. Regnal year 1, under the power of the king of Egypt, Ramesses, or Ramesses II. The new Horus was 20 years old, give or take, and as he settled into his first months of rule, the king had business in Waset. At the start of his reign, Ramesses was already thinking about its end. This was important. The new Horus needed to plan for the day when he became an Osiris, like his father and grandfather before. Looking to that future, the king required 2 monuments to serve him in eternity. He would need a memorial temple devoted to his spirit, or Ka, and he would need a tomb nestled among the hills. Ramesses began work on both of these monuments in the first year of his reign. Ramesses built his memorial temple close to the Nile. It survives to this day, and we call it the Ramesseum. The Ramesseum, not its original name, is an enormous complex at the edge of the farmland, where the green meets the desert. At its heart, the temple is dominated by an elaborate stone structure with shrines, columned halls, courtyards, and absolutely gigantic statues. Then, around that stone core, sprawls a miniature city of mud brick buildings. These are the support facilities, including scribes' offices, storage rooms, a library or school, butcheries, bakeries, candlestick makeries, and so forth. The temple has largely collapsed over the centuries, but parts of it have been preserved and rebuilt by archaeologists. The ruins of the Ramesseum are evocative, especially at sunset, a beautiful remnant rising before the western hills. We will explore this temple properly in the future as the reign of Ramesses unfolds, but thanks to archaeological work over the past few decades, we know that Ramesses started building the Ramesseum immediately after his accession. Excavations in the temple grounds have identified its foundations, where the building first began. Among the remains, archaeologists have found the small burials of artifacts that we call foundation deposits. Foundation deposits can vary, but they usually include miniature tools, models of the actual implements that the builders would use. They also have plaques made of stone or faience, with the name of the ruler who commissioned the structure. At the Ramesseum, researchers have found these foundation deposits, and they include the early form of Ramesses' name, User Ma'at Ra, with no epithets. The deposits probably come from the inner shrines at the western part of the temple. The builders would start there and then expand the complex forward, which makes sense. Get the religious space done first so that the temple is operational as soon as possible. You have to wonder if the builders who gathered in the first year of Ramesses' rule knew just how large this temple was going to become. The same is true for Ramesses' tomb. Ramesses built his grave in the Valley of the Kings. It is slightly south of Tutankhamun's. Again, we'll explore this monument properly at the end of the king's reign, but like the memorial temple, it is worth noting that Ramesses started this project as soon as he became monarch. We know that because in the entrance corridor, part of the decoration has the early form of Ramesses' royal name, User Ma'at Ra, or Wasmuria, powerful is the Ma'at of Ra. The appearance of this form of the name, which was exclusively used in year 1, suggests that the entrance to the tomb and the first corridor were built quickly and decorated in the first year of rule. Later, they would expand the monument further, adding more staircases, passages, and chambers, and the tomb of Ramesses would grow impressively large, like his memorial temple. But for now, it's enough to know that work started right away, which gives us an insight into the mindset of Ramesses. He was young, but his tomb was a top priority. Fair enough, the king might be youthful, but death can strike at any time. And when it came to the monuments of eternity, his memorial temple, and the place where he would ultimately rest, it was better to start now and be safe rather than sorry. Following his accession, Ramesses stayed in Waset, modern Luxor, for at least 2 months. We know that because one of his first royal acts was participating in a festival, the celebration that we call Opet. Opet, or Epet in the hieroglyphs, was the annual festival of Waset. Across 10 days, in the second month of Achet, the flood season, enormous celebrations took place in the temples of Karnak and Luxor. The ancient names for these sanctuaries were Opet Sut and Opet Resit. The Opet, or sanctuary, is where we get the name of the festival. This was a party for those temples and the gods who dwelled within. The Opet Festival was dominated by an enormous procession between the two sanctuaries. The golden statues of Amun-Ra, Mut, and Khonsu would emerge from their shrines at Karnak, and riding portable boats carried on the shoulders of priests, they would travel out of this temple. The populace could see the gods, or at least their shrines, as they proceeded along the roads, and great dispensations of food and drink made the whole affair a fun and festive holiday. From the temple, the gods went down to the river to board enormous ships and sail upon the Nile. The boats proceeded from the northern sanctuary, Karnak, to the southern, Luxor, and when they arrived, the gods went into that second shrine to commune with the king and renew his divine power. After that, they did the process in reverse, heading back to their hidden sanctums at Karnak. Ramesses' art shows him participating in these kinds of affairs. At Karnak, on the walls of the hypostyle hall, you can find the young king leading Amun-Ra and other deities in grand parades. In one of these scenes, on the west wall of the court, Ramesses pulls the boat of Amun, the great barge called Osiris Sety I, or foremost of strength. The king is assisted by 4 other deities, the wolf lord Waset, the opener of the ways, Horus, called the foremost of the cataract, by Khnum, the lord of the cataract, and by another Horus with the same epithet as before. Why are there 2 Horuses? Unclear. Well, actually there's 3, if you include Ramesses, which you should. Ambiguities aside, the overall meaning is clear. The king, accompanied by deities of guidance, Waset, creation, Khnum, and rulership, Horus, bring the barge of Amun-Ra along the river in his grand procession. It is a display of royal and divine pageantry, and a message of connection between Ramesses and his divine father. If there was any ambiguity about that message, the hieroglyphs make it clear. Quote, "The Horus, victorious bull, beloved of Ma'at, Ramesses, one whom the king of the gods, Amun-Ra, created and caused to be established, in order to exercise the god's kingship on earth. His person, Ramesses, appears, and his heart is glad, in order to row his father Amun-Ra and the gods who are in his entourage. The king has placed himself at the tow rope of the barge Osiris Sety I, like Ra in his night boat. All the gods rejoice, bearing Amun-Ra to Waset. He has made a good journey, like Ra at his rising, in order to rest at Karnak, the district of eternity, which the son of Ra, Ramesses, has made for him." End quote. In another scene, right next to this one, Ramesses stands on the ship of Amun. He bows to the god, who sits in his shrine amidships, and Ramesses burns incense to make a pleasant scent for the god. In the art, the deity is obscured, hidden within his shrine, but we know he's there, and he speaks praise for Ramesses, describing the piety of his earthly son. The hieroglyphs describe it. Quote, "Words spoken by Amun-Ra to the Ennead, or divine council, who are in the primeval waters. Amun says, 'My beloved son of my body, the lord of the 2 lands, Ramesses, I have reared him with my body in order to perform good things for my temple. I have chosen Ramesses ahead of millions in order to do that which pleases my Ka spirit. I have united the reed pen with the papyrus paper. The record of my wishes is in Ramesses' grasp. because he has acted to row me from the southern sanctuary back to my shrine at Karnak." End quote. So Ramesses acted for his divine father, Amun-Ra, and the god proclaimed to all how he had raised Ramesses to be a good king, how he chose Ramesses from the vast multitudes of humanity on account of his inherent value. Such proclamations would be recorded on paper with pen, and thus written down by the god and goddess of writing, Jehuti, or Thoth, and Seshat, the female scribe. These two deities appear repeatedly in the art that Ramesses commissioned at Karnak. They record the king's piety before the great gods, and they write down the blessings which the gods gave in return. The deeds of Ramesses for his divine parents were written in the Medu Necher, the sacred words, which is the official name for hieroglyphs, and they were carved in stone, preserved for all eternity. For the faithful watching these processions or looking at this art, the message could not be any clearer. Egypt's new pharaoh was truly beloved of the god. The Opet Festival was a grand affair, much larger than I can describe here. If you would like to know more about it, I did explore the celebrations in great detail back in episode 146. And we will talk about Opet more in the future, because Ramesses II will make a few changes to this elaborate celebration. For now, we can imagine the young ruler participating in these rituals, going on parade from the palace to the temple, greeting the divine statues, and guiding them in the procession by land and by river, taking these beings to Luxor temple, the southern sanctuary, to commune with him directly and with all the gods. At the end of the ceremonies, Ramesses and the gods would emerge renewed, full of divine and royal power, and ready to rule. With all of this going on, the rituals of succession, the establishment of new monuments, and the celebration of the Opet Festival, Ramesses II appears to have spent at least a few months in the city of Waset at the very start of his reign. Within that period, he devoted a great deal of attention to Karnak. While he was there, honoring his divine father, Amun-Ra, Ramesses also took the time to honor his earthly father, the Osiris Sety I. Again, the hypostyle hall bears images of the young king participating in rituals before the gods. We also see him making offerings to his father. In these images, Ramesses stands before Sety I. Sometimes Sety is a statue in a beautiful shrine. Other times he just appears as himself. And sometimes he is accompanied by his Ka, the spirit or essence of a person. In other words, Ramesses shows his father as an image, a sculpture of wood or stone, or directly as if he, or his spirit, is still present before the new king. These images are important to understand the personal mindset of Ramesses at the very start of his reign. While they are formal, religious art, they do communicate the idea that Sety was still a political and religious presence in the regime of his successor. Whether it was a positive or a negative is beside the point. The shadow of Sety hung over Ramesses as he first began his rule. In one appearance, Ramesses holds out an incense burner, and he pours water from a metal vase, purifying offerings for his father. The hieroglyphs on this scene proclaim Ramesses saying, quote, "O incense, the scent of the god, its scent belongs to you, Sety. The scent of the eye of Horus belongs to you." So Ramesses ensures that his deceased father will always have pleasant air and the magic of these divine scents wherever he goes. In another scene, Ramesses holds 4 jars, from which he pours 4 streams of water over Sety. The hieroglyphs indicate that this is a ritual, performed 4 times, and they say, quote, "Going around 4 times, and saying, 'Be pure, Osiris Men Ma'at Ra,' or Sety I. May you live, may you be made new once more, may you be rejuvenated." So Ramesses performs a ceremony to guarantee his father's everlastingness and continual renewal wherever he may be. Finally, we see a statue of Seti. We know it's a statue because it stands atop a small ledge or podium, just like the ones on which actual Egyptian statues appear. The statue is placed within a shrine, which is crowned with cobras, the Uraeus serpent. In front of this shrine, Ramesses offers a table piled with offerings. There are lotus flowers to give nice scents, fruits and vegetables like dates and figs, poultry, small birds that have been cleaned and cooked, loaves of bread, and jugs or bottles filled with nice drinks. The young Horus is giving the image of his father all food and nourishment that his spirit might require in the next world. Ramesses wears a specific costume, a long kilt with a leopard skin over his shoulders, and a wig with a thick braid or sidelock down one side. This is the image called Horus Iyun Mutef, or Horus, the pillar of his mother. It is a symbol of transition between one phase and the next. We saw this symbol last episode when Ramesses appeared as the Yun Mutef before the gods to receive blessings and long life. Well, the motif appears again as the young king honors his father's statue, and symbolically the transition is communicated. Symbolically, that would suggest these images belong to the very start of Ramesses' reign, and that is confirmed by his name, which appears as Usur Ma'at Ra with no epithet. This is the form he used in year 1. With that in mind, it's easy to imagine this being one of the first images that Ramesses commissioned when adding to the hypostyle hall. At the very start of his reign, the young Horus honored the image of his father, the Osiris Sety. If you are visiting the hypostyle hall today, you will find the images I just described on the south wall. It's on your right when you first enter the sanctuary and past the columns. They appear to either side of the doorway, usually halfway up the wall. This area is usually quiet. I recommend seeking these images out to see the two generations side by side. So, Ramesses spent the first couple months in Waset, honoring his earthly father, Seti I, and his divine father, Amun-Ra. Inevitably, though, Ramesses would need to leave Karnak and the southern city. It was time to head north. We know the date of his departure. In one of his royal texts, Ramesses described his leaving from the great city. He said, quote, "In year 1, the 3rd month of Achet, day 23, his person, Ramesses, returned from Waset after conveying Amun to Opet, i.e. the Opet Festival. The king had come forth, favored with valor and victory before the gods in Waset. His person returned from the southern city. He began the journey, setting sail, the royal ships illuminating the waters, and turning downstream towards the place of valor, the city called Ramesses, great in victories." End quote. Ramesses left Waset in the 3rd month of Achet, the flood season. This would be October, roughly speaking. The river was at its highest level as the flood waters washed northward. A good moment to sail. The people of the villages, resting while their fields were inundated, could come forth to see the new pharaoh riding his splendid barge. Ramesses describes the journey briefly, but we can imagine a grand procession. The royal ship, 12 meters long and made of cedar wood, would flow with the current, and banks of rowers would propel it speedily down the river. Ramesses' destination was a city that he was already calling Ramesses, or the House of Ramesses. This is a famous town that we will visit before too long. But Ramesses was north, as far north as it was possible to go and still be in Egypt. So as he left Waset, the ruler was heading from one end of his kingdoms to the other. Along the way, Ramesses would pass many great and famous towns, cities like Iyunet or Dendera, the home of Hathor, Abdju or Abydos, sacred to Osiris, Cheni, or Thinis, the ancestral home of the Egyptian monarchs. Akhet Aten, or Amana, the fading ruin of Akhenaten's ideals. Hemenu, Hermopolis, the city of the Ennead and of Jehuti, or Thoth. And of course, Hikupita, or Men-Nefer, the city that we know as Memphis, the ancient residence of kings and the house of Ptah, lord of artisans. Last, but certainly not least, Ramesses would visit Iunu, Heliopolis, the city of Atum and Ra, the home of solar worship. All of those places would be on his itinerary, either now or in the future, and pretty much every site I just mentioned has some monument or trace of Ramesses' work. We won't visit these cities now, but as the decades of Ramesses' reign unfold, there will be many chances to see these towns. First, Ramesses set sail from Waset and began his course downriver. His first major stop was the city called Abdju, known today as Abydos. Abdju was ancient and incredibly important. It was here, around 3000 BCE, that Egypt's earliest rulers had built their tombs. Kings like Narmer, Scorpion, Mernith, and Den. Over the centuries, the Abdju necropolis had become the epicenter for the cult of Usir, or Osiris. It was at Abdju that the temples of Usir stood, his priests honored his memory, and where, supposedly, the god himself was buried. Ramesses' father, Sety I, had invested a lot of wealth in Abydos. The late king had commissioned an enormous temple that still stands today. That monument was devoted to Usir, Osiris, to Sety as Osiris, and to many other gods besides. It is one of the finest temples in all Egypt. Ramesses II was going to add to it. When Sety died, his great temple was only half finished. The main sanctuary was built, and the decoration was well advanced. But the front part of the temple, its outer halls, its courtyards, and its pylon gateways, those were still incomplete. So Ramesses would need to invest in that to finish his father's work. He recorded his contributions in spectacular fashion. If you visit Abydos and Sety's temple today, you'll walk along the eastern approach, from the ancient harbour up towards the sanctuary. As you reach the main building, you are confronted with a facade of square pillars and a shadowy doorway leading into the halls. You might be tempted to hurry inside to escape the heat and the light, but take a moment and study the exterior of this temple. The square pillars and outer walls of Sety's monument are actually decorated by Ramesses. Inheriting his father's unfinished work, the new king continued to fund the construction, and when it was time to add art, Ramesses did so in his name rather than Sety's. This is a common feature of Ramesses' reign, and many pharaohs actually. We'll discuss the significance another time. In short, Sety's great temple is adorned with art of that ruler, but also of his son. To the left of the main door, when you are facing the temple directly, you will find a wall that is covered in hieroglyphs, column after column describing Ramesses' work for his father, and his piety towards the Osiris Sety. This text is quite significant, and scholars often call it the Great Abydos Dedication, or a variation of that. It's a long text, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's a fascinating glimpse at Ramesses' mindset at the very start of his reign, his political, religious, and even emotional attitude towards his late father. The text begins quite abruptly. It does not have the usual spiel of Ramesses' names and titles glorifying him. Instead, it just starts. Quote, "It came to pass, a son who avenges his father, like Horus did when he avenged Osiris. A son who formed the one who formed him, who fashioned the one who fashioned him, who caused to live the name of the one who begat him, the king of southern and northern Egypt, Ramesses, beloved of Osiris, the lord of Abydos. Now, in year 1, the 3rd month of Akhet, day 23, his person, Ramesses, returned after conveying Amun to Opet in the Opet Festival. His person returned from the southern city, beginning the journey and setting sail, the royal ships illuminating the waters. But his person turned aside to see his father sailing the canal of the province Tawer, that is the district in which Abydos is located. He did this to perform offerings for Usir, Osiris, the good things that his Ka spirit loves. End quote. This text records Ramesses' departure from the southern city, and along the way he stops at Abydos to make offerings. As a pious ruler, Ramesses naturally wanted to honor the great and powerful gods, not just in Karnak and Opet, but in all the sanctuaries of the land, especially at Abydos. This sentiment is probably genuine. The start of any reign was a good time to ensure the gods were honored and supportive of the new ruler, and whatever Ramesses' personal beliefs or favor towards particular deities, the god Usir, Osiris, was absolutely vital. After all, Ramesses' father had just become Usir a couple of months earlier. His grandfather had done so a decade before. And one day, perhaps not too far in the future, Ramesses himself would ascend to that role. So we can probably take his word that as he set forth on his first royal voyage, the king wanted to visit Osiris. Alas, when Ramesses arrived in Abdju, Abydos, he found the monuments of this region far from satisfactory. Quote, He, Ramesses, found the shrines belonging to former kings, the tombs which are in Abydos, falling gradually into ruin, some of them still under construction. They were covered with earth, their walls lying unfinished, one brick not even touching another. What was only begun on the foundations had crumbled back to dust. Even the temple of Menma'adra, Sety, its front and its rear were still under construction. Pillars were not erected, and its statue was upon the ground. The divine offerings had stopped, as had the priests, who acted irregularly with regard to the temple's fields. The boundaries of those fields were not established on earth. End quote. Oh dear, this would never do. A royal necropolis, burial place of the earliest kings, falling into disrepair? The temple of Sety, now an Osiris, incomplete and with no work taking place. Something was rotten in the house of Abdju. Ramesses is probably exaggerating here. The tombs of the ancient kings were old, but there isn't any direct evidence for Ramesses doing repairs or new building work. And the site of those tombs, an area now called the el-Kab, had been a site of pilgrimage for centuries. Archaeologists working here find mounds of pottery from offerings brought by worshippers. This pottery dates to all periods, from the Old Kingdom all the way to the Roman era. So chances are the tombs of the first kings were still a site of regular visitation and attention from the local priests. We can only speculate, but if the tombs were crumbling, Ramesses' restoration has not survived, visibly, in the archaeological record. I'm not calling him a liar or anything, but maybe things weren't quite as bad as he suggested. The temple of Sety was another matter. That most definitely was unfinished. The front sections that I just described were entirely unbuilt, and the Osirion at the rear had been mostly constructed, but still not decorated. The builders may indeed have stopped working, waiting for the new king to give them new instructions. But the idea that worship in the temple had stopped simply because Sety was dead is a bit more dubious. Granted, the priests might also have been awaiting new instructions, but one suspects that Ramesses is dialing up the calamity to make his deeds seem better. Anyway, the king had work to do to complete his father's temple, and he tells us about it on the walls of that monument. Quote, I commanded that Sety's temple should be supplied. I established his fields. I instituted for him the offerings, being provisions of bread, beer, oxen and poultry, wine, incense, all kinds of fruit and fresh vegetables, with orchards growing for Sety. I will not neglect his place, like those children who forget their fathers. I shall finish them in their proper fashion. I will build up the walls of the temple, and I will put in charge a man whom I chose to direct this work. I shall make good all that is missing from the temple's walls. I shall complete its pylons. I shall roof the house. I shall roof the house of Sety. I shall erect his pillars. I will set stones in the foundation trenches. It is good to make multiple monuments." End quote. Ramesses describes himself resetting the temple's economic and religious operations. He designates farmland to supply food and materials, and he commits to finishing the building. He even goes so far as to appoint a new overseer to manage the construction. We don't know who this overseer was, but he must have done a good job because eventually the Temple of Sety was completed. These gifts were not idle generosity. There was a purpose to it. Finishing the temple was obviously worthwhile, but in the grander religious and personal sense, Ramesses wanted to demonstrate the bond between himself and Sety. He makes that explicit in the next section, where Ramesses speaks directly to the memory of his father. Quote, "The king of South and North, Ramesses, spoke to his father, the Osiris Men-Ma'at-Ra, Sety I. He, Ramesses, said, 'Awake, with your face to the sky, so that you may see Ra. O my father, Sety, who is a god, I have directed attention to your temple. Your food offerings are assured. You lie in the duat like Usir, Osiris, while I appear as Ra to the Rekhit, or common people. I have come in person to see your temple. I have finished the work on it. I have laid out the grounds. I have done that which you desired, making every shrine belong to you. I have established your name in those shrines forever." End quote. Ramesses is describing a lot of things that would take time to achieve. The text itself is retrospective. He started this work in year 1, and then when it was all finished, he carved these hieroglyphs on the wall of the temple. So it's kind of operating in the past and the present from Ramesses' point of view. Ramesses goes on for a while, listing all the wonderful things he has done. He mentions farms and workers, provisions and offerings. He also mentions giving the temple its own trading ship, called a mensha, to bring valuable goods from Ta-Netcher, the god's land, in the region of Somalia and Ethiopia. An impressive gift that would place Sety's monument at the heart of a wide-ranging economic network. If those offerings and gifts continued, this would have been one of the wealthiest temples in southern Egypt. Ramesses wraps up his dedication by saying to his father, quote, "I pray for breath for your nose. I speak your name frequently throughout the day so that Sety's memory can live. May Ra grant life to you, his son, with a loving heart. If I hear of some trouble that is about to occur, then I will immediately command its complete removal. While I reign, you, Sety, are like one who is still alive. I will not neglect your house, for I have set my heart to care for you." End quote. The pious words of a dutiful son. But the speech is strong, detailed, almost emotional, and you almost wonder if Ramesses spoke these words sincerely in mourning for his father. Obviously, the truth of his emotions and his actual bond with Sety, that is a matter of speculation. The truth died with them. But reading a text like this, it's not hard to imagine the young ruler looking at the image of his father and praying for his well-being. I'll leave it to you to interpret the sincerity of Ramesses' proclamation, but the speech is undeniably evocative. Oddly enough, though, the text ends with a speech from Sety himself. He replies to his son from beyond the grave. According to the hieroglyphs, the deceased king, the Osiris Men-Ma'at-Ra, spoke to Ramesses in gratitude for his deeds. He said, quote, "Let your heart be glad, my beloved son, Ramesses. Behold, I, Sety, have accepted the things that you have given me, my bread and water, with gladness and breath for my nose, on account of the deeds of a son who has a good nature. I have become divine beyond my former perfection, because you cared for me while I am in the duat. I am your true father, being a god. I mingle with the gods who follow the Aten, the sun disk, and I know the one who is in his bark, that is, Ra. You, Ramesses, are the living. Your every word becomes like those of the Lord of all. You are the admirable egg or offspring of Khepri, and the divine seed that came from him. Your birth was something done by Ra himself. Welcome, Ramesses, as a living Ra for the Rekit people, the commoners. The south and the north are united under your 2 feet. The gods have given millions of said festivals to Usir Ma'at Ra, even the lifespan of the Lord of all, the sun god, at his rising and his setting forever and eternity." End quote. You almost want to put an Amen at the end of that. This kind of return speech is slightly unusual for a deceased king. It does happen on monuments, especially when rulers are making offerings to their ancestors, but Sety's words are more detailed, more personal than usual. It almost has the tone of a ghost coming back to pass the torch to a new generation. This idea seems to be partly intentional. Ramesses' works at Sety's temple were those of a pious son for his father, but they also solidified his succession to Sety's throne and power. As the old Horus had become Osiris, the new Horus took up his mantle, and Ramesses made it clear for anyone who might visit the temple, anyone who could read the words. On the facade of Sety's monument, the inheritance was laid out in crystal clear terms. It is always hard, nearly impossible, to find the boundary between personal and formal. With texts like these, we will always wonder, which parts are Ramesses' own thoughts, and which are merely the expected behavior of a son for his father, a new king for his predecessor? If you'll allow me to speculate, the image that Ramesses projected was one of piety and obedience to his late father's legacy. That was expected. A son should not abandon his father's work. It was also valuable, giving Ramesses himself legitimacy as the Horus who avenges his father, Osiris. In that sense, the personal and the political were inextricably linked. In the nature of ancient Egyptian kingship, you can't separate Ramesses the son from Ramesses the successor. That being said, Ramesses' memorials for his father are unusual in their length and detail. Other monarchs had commemorated their predecessors in art and proclamations, but Ramesses expands on that, going much deeper into the religious and personal connections between himself and Sety. As we have seen, the image of the late ruler appears throughout the earliest monuments of the king. It seems like, at the start of his reign, the father was a constant presence in Ramesses' deeds. Whether this reflects a genuine emotional bond, we can only guess. But one thing we can say, at the start of Ramesses' reign, the shadow of Sety was a long one. Would Ramesses ever escape that shadow? Well, only time would tell. Thank you for listening to the History of Egypt podcast. Next time, Ramesses begins to accelerate the momentum of his rule. He carries on down the Nile to great centers, Most notably, he pays a visit to the Sphinx at Giza in order to honor the god who inhabited that statue, and to make plans for his conquests. Ramesses was a young ruler, full of vigor and fire, and he would need to start thinking about his wars. We will explore some of that in the next episode. Before I go, I would like to extend my gratitude to the supporters who subscribe to my Patreon. These fine folks at all tiers help me to pay for the things I need to do, like eat, sleep, and have a place to live. As my wife and I are starting to get settled in the UK, it is a great relief to know that your support continues. Times are tough out there, and I am deeply grateful to every single one of you for your support. Thank you. An extra expression of gratitude must go to the priests, my top-tier subscribers. These fine folks go way beyond what is reasonable for this little show, and I am eternally in their debt. My thanks to Linda, Eric, Terry, TJ, Yola, Mycost, Andy and Chelsea, Nidin, Ashley, Veronica, James, Jeffrey, Jean, Karen, Yen, Dan, James, and Chris. Folks, you are all too generous. I hope that you will receive great benefits from your parents, whether divine or earthly, bodily or chosen. And may your legacy last as long as the monuments of Abydos. Folks, you are all too generous. I am in your debt. Once again, thank you for listening to the History of Egypt podcast. I'll see you soon.